gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? The show starts in 3, 2, 1, go.
Good morning, CaneSport. It's July the 15th, 2022. I'm Gary Ferman, the publisher of CaneSport.com, as we discuss the news of the day, presented as always by LifeWallet, where the time is now to take charge of your personal health. And today, we're going to have a little bit of a different show. Matt Shodell's traveling. I'm going to be joined by Charles Power, who's On3's Director of Scouting and Rankings. And we're going to have a detailed conversation that is meant to just inform everybody how these rankings come together. And as it pertains to Miami right now, of course, there was a lot of people upset that Jaden Wayne was ranked lower with On3 than other services. So I wanted to bring Charles Power on. He heads up the team that does the rankings and try to sort of explain to everybody how it comes together, whether you agree, disagree, like it, don't like it. That's obviously an individual interpretation and opinion. But from my viewpoint, having been involved with this for 20 years, I can tell you that these guys, they have a thankless job. They're breaking down thousands of high school kids. They're trying to stack them up. I don't know how they do it, quite frankly. Some kids they're going to see more than others. The ones they see more than others are, without question, going to get a higher benefit of the doubt in the rankings. If you're seeing somebody in person going against other quality competition at a camp, it's different than when you're just watching a game film. So you guys will be able to watch it. We did about a 35-minute interview that talks about rankings and the process they go through, watching film, then watching kids in person, assigning them a number, seeing how they stack up, deciding how many players from each position are you going to put into the top 32, which makes somebody a 5-star, and then the next group that makes them 4 stars, and then obviously it goes down to 3 stars. And really, it is not an exact science. And the thing that I thought was interesting was that On3 has created what's called a super 5-star category, 5-star plus category, which is guys in the consensus rankings that are ranked 5 stars in all 4 services. And I'm not going to give it away, but you're going to be amazed when we get to that point of the conversation how few guys are ranked the same by all 4 services that go through this process. So that's coming up here in a minute. But first, I wanted to take a moment and just touch on the other news of the day. And we have a feature this morning on what Miami Hurricane defensive player will be the season's biggest surprise. And I think you guys will enjoy that. Our CaneSport Player Performance Index feature continues with a breakdown of number 17, Leonard Taylor. Our State of the U series continues with a look at the 2022 recruiting class, which was Mario Cristobal's first, even though he only had about a month or so to decide who he wanted and get other guys and bring it together. I think everybody would agree on this, that it came together very nicely considering what they were going through. And then we have another interesting story. Our high school coaches series continues, this time with St. Thomas Aquinas coach Roger Harriet, who's one of the obviously more successful coaches in South Florida. I think everybody's going to find it very interesting to see just what Roger thinks about the progress being made in the Miami Hurricanes program. And lastly, today we have a story on 5-star Desmond Ricks, a kid that Miami is recruiting very heavily. He's ranked number 2 right now in the 2024 rankings, and is obviously going to be one of the elite recruits in the country. So a lot of his 7-on-7 teammates from down here in South Florida are recruiting him to the U. They are already committed to Miami. Does that give Miami an edge or not? You'll find out when you read the story on Desmond Ricks. And we also will be covering him this weekend at the Future 50 competition at IMG in Bradenton between CaneSport and On3. We will have a lot of coverage on that. But without further ado, I'd like to go to the interview that I recorded with Charles Power. I think, you guys that are interested in rankings, will find it interesting. If you're not interested in rankings, you're probably done with this show for today. But I thought it was important just because of how much conversation we've had on the message boards about rankings, how angry some people get about the rankings. So without further ado, here is my interview with Charles Power. All right, Charles, welcome to Good Morning CaneSport. We thank you so much for taking some time out today. So, CaneSport's new to On3. On3 is a new network. It's one of 4 networks in the country that rank high school players. So I thought it would be good just to bring you on the show and kind of inform people the process that you guys that do these rankings go through on a day-to-day basis year-round, and just give people a general understanding of what they're looking at when they look at ranking. Let's start with that. You've got the rankings this year, but you guys really start working a couple years in advance to start kind of stacking up these high school players all across the country.
Yeah, for sure. Like our initial ranking is typically the August, September, like before the sophomore year, like heading into the sophomore year. So that's the initial ranking. That's for us, that's typically a watch list. Like when I worked at 24/7 Sports, we would do like a top 100. But that's kind of like your initial ranking that kind of sets the board with the expectation that it's going to change a ton. A lot of those guys that are on those initial ranking lists end up being top prospects, but it's, it's very fluid. You're dealing with, 15-year-olds a lot of times. So that's the first one going into the sophomore year, early sophomore year. And then we do it all the way until, January of their senior season, of their senior year, after the senior season's over. And that's the final one. That's after all-star games, the senior season. And one thing I think that's really important for everybody to understand, and something like I just try to hammer home all the time, especially when you do this as much as we do, or it's like look at NFL. The NFL draft is a thing that highly informs kind of our process, and just kind of studying constantly, the top players in college football, top draft picks. It just, from my time doing this, the senior season is really one of the better indicators, kind of like long-term success, how a guy plays as a senior, how they look, production, all of that kind of stuff. And, a lot of the recruitment and really the attention on prospects really comes before the senior season, right? So like most of these guys are committed, they're committing to, taking official visits in the summer now. So that's kind of all to say, these rankings that we're working on prior to the senior season, like the most important stuff hasn't happened yet. So that's kind of a major caveat here. And we try to stay really nimble on that and update it throughout the senior year, and then the final ranking in January. So, we just kind of approach it as a work in progress. Just to kind of touch on, kind of our philosophy. First off, our macro philosophy is we're really projecting long-term potential, which I think is probably best measured via the NFL draft. It's the only other time, in a player's, trajectory or like their career where they're really kind of like sorted out like quantitatively in, the recruiting, rankings, and then the NFL draft, really the only 2 times that happens. So that for us is kind of the best, measurement of like success, in recruiting rankings. And typically too, that oftentimes like dovetails with the best teams, they're at least the most talented team. You look at like Georgia this year, they had all these guys drafted and they won the national championship. So that typically flows, at least in terms of, high level college football. Even like Cincinnati made the playoff, had a ton of guys drafted, right? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of our macro philosophy on kind of what we're shooting for when we look at prospects, like long-term potential. Those are oftentimes the best player. I mean, a lot of times they're the best players in high school too, but not always. So that, and then, so when, like, to get into kind of the fine details, when we actually start putting the ranking together, we always start by position. So, for instance, quarterback, we go through and we rank all the quarterbacks in order. We do that for every position. And then of course we have the rating scale, which is for us, a 5-star is 98, 99, 100. 100 is the highest you'll go. I don't think we've had 100 yet since we've been doing them. in 4 stars are 90 to 97, and 3 stars are 80 to 90.
And how do you assign those numbers?
So that's the rating. So we will assign those within the position groups. So, typically you'll have, maybe 20 or so at each number between 89 and 80. And then, it gets smaller and smaller as you go up. We have 32 5 stars. That's 32 prospects at the end of the cycle. There'll be 32 every year. And that's they end up with at least a 98 rating. There'll probably be a couple 99s maybe, or maybe 1 or 2 100s I would say at the very most. That's like a pure like franchise prospect. So that's kind of the rating scale. And I think that's really important. When you look at our rankings, it's always important to look at the rating scale, the ratings off of the movement, right? So like we could put out a updated top 300 on 300, and a guy could move 20 30 spots and their rating doesn't change. It's really important to like see if the rating changes or not, and oftentimes it doesn't, but just the general list movement can be 20 30 spots here or there very easily, and that's just all oftentimes of other prospects being slotted in the ranking moving up. So one person, if a guy who's a 3-star moves to number 50 in the country, makes a big move, that's 250 guys who are moving down one spot.
Right.
So that's just an important thing to kind of realize when you look at like movement in the rankings. It's not always this guy's being actively moved down. I think it's really important for I think a lot of the fans might not like know kind of like the details of the list movement. So that's really important. But I guess kind of getting back to the list, so we put all the positions in order. And then we go to make our on 300 ranking, which is just the numerical 1 through 300. That's the only ones we rank numerically. It's just a 300, and we slot it that way, and that's based off of the rating. So we'll pull up all of our 98s, all of our 5 stars. We rank the 5 stars and kind of just put all the positions together. Then all the 97s. So, and as we do this further, the ratings kind of become a little more hardened. It takes up more for a guy to move up to a 93, for instance, or down to a 92, or, so that as we do it, it becomes tougher and tougher to kind of like, move stuff. And we try to like, also too, like we don't do this on a whim. Like we almost always have a reason why we move a guy up or down, like why the ratings changes. I mean, since I've been working on the rankings in some form or fashion for, 8-10 years. And like, I think at this point in the process in our 2023 ranking, going into the senior season, this is the most information I've ever had putting a ranking together. Like the information we've kind of gathered over the last, over the summer is really kind of staggering. So like, that's what we're working on right now, is kind of sorting through all that. And this is like verified stuff we get. We get it from, companies that put on camps. We get it from colleges, track data. So we're looking at all of that stuff. I mean, it's the most I've ever had to go through. So that's kind of our process and our overall philosophy. And our ranking process, I think, is really important. It does not, from a timeline perspective, it does not end once they're committed, or after. Like this is going to go all the way up until January. And a lot of times it's very, like, I think us maybe compared to other the other 3 outlets that do the rankings, I think we're kind of have the reputation already, and I think you'll kind of see that when you track it. So ours is like much more fluid, and I think that's the most honest way to do it, because unlike the NFL draft, if you look at the NFL draft when they're doing like draft boards, mock drafts, most of the time that stuff's coming out after the season's over, so you have all the information. We're doing this live while in real time, while we're getting information from the sophomore year to the senior year. And as you move forward, like it becomes more and more important. It's like a very much a what have you done for me recently kind of thing, just in terms of if you look at the prospects who end up hitting and being successful, that's really what matters. So like that's to say the senior year, the all-star game stuff, like we weigh that really heavily, especially to like what you were ranked as a sophomore. Like the further and further you get away from that, the less and less that matters, to it basically mattering not at all.
All right. So There's a million questions. We're not going to talk about this for an hour, but I think there's some key things that we need to talk about. All right. So you mentioned the numbers 99, 98, 97, 96. Mm-hmm. How do you guys arrive at that numbers? Is it film study, seeing kids in person? What do those numbers mean, and how do they get created?
Yeah. So they aren't formulated in a vacuum. So typically, rankings are it's really like you're comparing the prospects. Like you're basing, somebody's got to be number one, somebody's got to be number 300. So it starts with the comparison within the position group. I think we look at positional value for sure. Like, quarterbacks are valued more, so the quarterbacks are going to be typically higher. I think most years we're going to have a quarterback number one or right there. By the same token, I don't think we're going to have like 8 quarterbacks as 5 stars. I think it's probably unlikely. But we, like pass rushers, edge rushers, typically highly valued, offensive tackles. So we look at all of that. You probably aren't going to see a ton of running backs as 5 stars, maybe now as you would have 15 years ago. So we look at that. I think in terms of how we started. I think the video is your basis. That's where we start first.
You look at every kid. You look at every kid on video that you find video for.
Yeah, we watch video on every single guy we rank.
And then you assign him a number based on what you see.
Yeah, well, it starts off with the position first. So typically, we'll just you start off with, I guess 50, 60 guys at each position, and you put them in order. And you can kind of the more and more you do this, you can watch a guy and kind of say, okay, this is like a 4-star possibility. And then as you sort it out, like the rating becomes more hardened the further we go along. Initially, we don't most of the first sophomore ranking, most of those guys are 90s, which is the lowest 4-star. We aren't, and I think that that rating builds up over time, because one thing too that's become increasingly prevalent is as some of these players will reclassify. And our kind of policy on when a player reclassifies is they just carry their rating over to the prior class. So for us, rating is really very important now for underclassmen to not overshoot that and to build it up, gradually. So yeah, but the video is really the bait. That's the building block for it for sure. We look at athletic testing data, track stuff, production stats. There's certain positions where that's more important than others. That's something I look at a ton with quarterbacks, but we have critical factors, and I've kind of written about this, over the last several years. But we have critical factors we look for at each position, and it kind of varies position to position. But that's kind of the basis, and it's a combination. It's really like doing these evaluations. There's really no one thing that's it's like you're kind of putting a puzzle together. And as we go further and further, we get increased exposure, in-person evaluations throughout the junior, senior year, really through the senior year. I think I was gone. I was on the road for almost half of June, and I saw probably the majority of the top prospects in the country. And we have another camp this weekend, Future 50, Under Armour Future 50 in Bradenton at IMG, where we'll see 50 of the top guys. Most of them are going to be our 2023 prospects. So, I feel really good about the exposure between all the summer before the senior year, and then All-Star games. So by the time the cycle's over, our rankings team has seen the majority of the top prospects that we're going to be ranking. So that's a point as well. But when you're ranking a sophomore, odds are we haven't seen those guys in person yet.
Right.
For the majority of them. Some of them you might have seen, but I remember seeing Brandon Ennis when he was in 8th grade at a Nike camp, but that's not common. So yeah, that's kind of our basis, and it evolves. I think it's really important to stress that our rankings are a work in progress and something we're building out until the final one in January for sure.
I will be your shield in the fiercest battle. I'll defend you.
Yeah.
Hey, my name is Cleveland Reed, and I play offensive line, and my job is to protect.
I protect my family with Life Wallet. How about you?
Of course I got Life Wallet. It's the best way to protect my family.
Long as we go together, we'll die whenever. Be a light, couldn't let the darkness try you ever. Truth in my word, you I lie to never.
To protect you and your family, get Life Wallet now.
Life Wallet. Saving time, saving lives.
So there's film study. You're going to every camp you can. I assume your travel budget is massive for you and your team.
Yeah, and I would say one thing too. That's like this has changed since I've been doing this. This has evolved over the years. Like now, like I can watch camp reps online of almost every guy that goes like to an Under Armour camp, for instance. And like during the season, this started a little in 2019, but it's especially more so like kind of during COVID. I don't travel as much during the season because I can watch all these high school games online. Like I'll usually watch like 5 or 6 games on every Friday night. So, and you can kind of go through them a little faster now, but so during the high school season, we're watching a lot of high school games. And that's something I think, as the new subscribers kind of become acclimated to kind of our process, you'll kind of see like, we're watching the games on Friday night a lot throughout the season. So instead of, because like it's just more efficient to do that, to watch, when I can watch 6 games on Friday versus going to just one and seeing it in person. You can cast a lot wider net when you're ranking. Right. Like we're ranking thousands of guys, so it's a lot easier to do it that way for sure.
And how often will the rankings change?
We have a schedule. All of our updates are planned out. Probably within a year in advance. I think if I had to guess, I think there's probably about 10 updates over the course of a cycle. And like I said, like most of our updates are pretty, like probably compared to what most people are used to, they're going to probably seem pretty drastic. Because it's just like I just think that's the most honest way to do it, to admit that this is stuff that's changing and really fluid constantly. I mean, I think if you had a live look at a lot of these colleges boards, people would kind of be stunned at how much stuff changes. So and we have a longer timeline because we don't have to finish our evaluations by the time these guys are juniors and going into their official visits. Like we're stretching it out all the way till after their senior year. So
now, in this business, there's a lot of people think they're experts on this, and everyone has opinions. Should this kid be higher? Should this kid be lower? That sort of thing. How much expertise does it take to do these rankings and really be able to study film and look for the nuances? And you're kind of the way you explained it, you're projecting kids based on their skill set into what they're going to be like at the end of their high school career going into college, and then even at the end of their college career. Yeah, how are they going to project to the NFL?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely difficult. Like you're going to miss on prospects for sure. I mean, I think if you look at like the stats on this, the recruiting rankings are getting better. And I think it's, I think some of it is the people that are doing it, but I think a lot of it is just the information we have. Like the information, we've never had more information, and it's really, a lot of it's just your stamina and ability to go through all of it and sort it all out. Most of the time when you look at guys who were like top draft picks, prospects who are end up being top draft picks, like the signs were there. The question is like, are you, going through it all? And then there's always, outliers, but I think you just try to hit a good enough of a percentage. And we have some stuff at On3 where we have like data like that looking at the drafts by star ratings and stuff, and it's pretty cool. A lot of cool tools, and I've written some about this, but it's like very it's like if in terms of the statistics, it's like where the guys are rated in high school is like very predictive on their odds of being a draft pick, especially high draft pick. So, the 5 stars hit at a pretty crazy rate relative to, 4 stars and especially 3 stars. So, I think it's just something, you get experience more and more doing it. You get a feel for kind of, I think some of it like is a trained eye, but I think a lot of it's just stamina and ability to, or just the willingness to go through all the prospects and continue doing it and continue looking at all their stuff throughout their senior year, right, until they enroll. Because, we have guys, like there are some prospects like in the 2024 class who are probably going to end up top 100 who haven't started playing football yet. It's something that's just very fluid. I think you just have to kind of stay on it, as the cycle progresses.
So in the 2022 NFL draft, there were 262 guys drafted. 20 of them were 5 stars, but 62.5% of 5 stars end up getting drafted. When you hear that number, does that surprise you? Does that make you say, geez, we got to do a better job of picking 5 stars? That should be closer to 100% if we're identifying these kids as elite. What goes through your mind when you hear 62.5% of 5 stars end up getting drafted?
I mean, I think if you compare that relative to the others, when you consider there's only 32, 5 stars a cycle, I think when you look at that, it's like I think I could pull up the numbers. I think they're like, several times more likely to get drafted, and that like they should be. But I think the industry in general hits 5 stars at a pretty crazy rate when you consider you're talking about 17-year-olds, 3-4 years out being drafted.
But 10 of those 32 won't get drafted. Does that amaze you? Does that, what do you think about that?
No, I mean it doesn't, and I think too, you consider you're probably looking at like consensus, and there might be 5 stars that we might be lower on, or other people might be higher on. So it's not like there have been cycles in the past where there have been guys who were, a consensus 5 star who I didn't think maybe were, and I'm sure there's others that, maybe other people didn't think were. So, no, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, I think in general, the industry does a really good job with 5 stars. And I think if you look at like the actual numbers, it would, like, if you compare it, like the odds, relative to other prospects. And I think if you talk to college coaches too now, like it's funny, like, 10 years ago, you would watch like National Signing Day press conferences, and college coaches would be like, "Oh yeah, we don't care about the rankings." But now, like, I think everybody understands, like, if you actually know the numbers and know how predictive this is, they'll all admit to you that they not only do they look at it, but they understand that like these are pretty accurate. And you can always pick out individual examples and say, y'all missed here, whatever. But like, I think when you look at it from the big picture lens and in terms of like team building and construction of a roster, like it is highly predictive of success. It kind of separates. There's, really honestly, there's probably 10 to 15 schools that even have a shot at winning a national championship based off of their roster. And a lot of that is indicative via recruiting rankings.
And those team recruiting rankings, which are obviously based on the player rankings, have become as important to college coaches as winning on Saturday afternoon. I mean, they consider it a competition, and they're serious about it, and they get after it in recruiting, and are always keeping an eye on the team rankings to see how it's going. All right, okay, so thousands of hours of film study, a lot of attendance at camps to see kids live. And then they get assigned a number, and that's how they stack up. And you try not to give out the 5-star rankings like they're candy, because the more 5 stars there are, the less significant being a 5-star is. And there's also been a lot of talk in the industry of reducing the number of 4 stars for that very reason, Charles, because it actually would probably help you guys, because it puts a premium on getting 5 and 4-star rankings to where they're really meaningful and have significance.
Yeah, and I think it's important to. I agree. We probably should have less 4 stars. I think probably the best way to do that is to just lower the number on like the consensus formula. For instance, like maybe not how many 5 stars on 3 ranks in our rankings, but just relative to the actual formula. Because I think when you look at, the number of players drafted, it should really be about the same number of like picks in a draft. That has a little wiggle room because, you have upwards of like 5 cycles typically that could, are in college at the same time. So there's really like 3 cycles counting redshirt seniors usually who are like draft eligible. So it's not necessarily like a 1-to-1 comparison, I guess. But it probably should be lower. And I think too, like, it's important to remember, man, like, being a 3-star is not a slight. Like, they're like, in our 3-star range is pretty broad, like an 80 to 89. But like a guy if we rank a prospect 88 or 89, like, we're saying like they have a pretty good chance of playing in the NFL. So I think that's an important way to look at it. I think, in terms of maybe the way rankings are viewed now, people like look at 3-stars and kind of scoff. Whereas, Gary, I know like you've been doing this a while. It probably wasn't always like that. That's something that's happened in the last, I don't know, 10 years or so. But you kind of go back to the early days, and I think when the numbers were smaller, it maybe did mean a little more for that. And I think too, I'll add with, our 5-stars, we gradually give those out. We don't have, like, we get to 32 at the end. I think, this time of year we'll probably shoot for about 20. And like, we aren't going to be shy to, if we don't think a guy's a 5-star, if a guy has if a prospect has an early 5-star ranking and we have like significant evidence that maybe that might not be accurate, like, we won't hesitate to make that change. But we also want to be like thorough in doing it, and actually have, I think the most important thing with making these changes, we try to have like actionable information when we do it. It's not on a whim. As fluid as it is, like, in terms of like the actual rating changing, especially adding a star, taking a star away, we try to be very deliberate and thorough with doing that.
Obviously, that doesn't always go over well with various fan bases, and I want to do a case study here before we let you go on Jaden Wayne. And I think it's a great case study because he has various rankings with the 4 different services. Rivals made him a 5-star, the number 13 player nationally. 247 made him a 4-star with a number 36 ranking nationally. ESPN made him a 4-star with a number 85 ranking nationally. And you guys at On3 made him a 4-star with a number 90, with a 93 ranking nationally. Now, in your system, he graded out as a 93. Can you give us a case study on the process with Jaden Wayne to this point and what it might look like going forward now that he is a commitment? He has a position. He's not necessarily a 2-way player as he's projecting at the college. He's going to be a defensive end at Miami. Give us a summary of how you guys got to this point with Jaden Wayne.
Yeah, so I think I want to say, I think we've always had him rated as an edge prospect. I know, some schools are maybe looking at him as a tight end. And there's a couple cases where, like, within our ranking process, really over the last maybe month, like, we look at what prospects are projected to play at their current, at where they're committed or where they're going. Like, for instance, like, we've had prospects who we project as offensive linemen. We view their ceiling as higher as offensive linemen. They commit somewhere as a defensive lineman. We view that their upside as a defensive lineman is lower. Like, that's going to probably change their ranking when we change in accord with us changing their position. So sometimes that goes together. With Jaden Wayne, I want to say we've always had him as an edge. It really is more so like where he stacks up in that edge group for us. With him, I think, it's really comparison to the other guys, and like maybe some of the ones ahead of him, like, we know a little more about or feel a little bit better about them as a pass rusher. So that's kind of how it shakes out for him, I think, relative to where he stacks up in that edge ranking. And that's one thing too, like, with the overall ranking. So like where he, like, his number 93, where he's number 93 in the On 300, that can change. Like for instance, like if there's an edge prospect who jumps Jaden Wayne, nothing Jaden Wayne did negatively. There's just a prospect who jumps ahead of him because of something he did positively. That is organically going to bump Jaden Wayne down in the overall rating. So if a guy is not actively moving up, oftentimes they're going to slide down, 5 to 20 spots in a ranking update by virtue of others rising. And it means, especially if others rise at their position, it's going to push it down more. Because you think about it, when we're putting this whole list together, there's like 12, 14 positions. And then, so you talk about like, okay, there's a quarterback here, running back here, a defensive lineman here. So when you factor that in, moving one spot down or getting jumped one spot within your position group could be 10 spots. It could be 20 spots really. Just by virtue of adding all the other positions together in the big list. So that's something I think that's important to remember. With Jaden Wayne too, I think one thing that's great about On3 is like we're transparent on the rankings. And I think when you like look at the profiles and even like within the ranking list, we have like the industry comparisons. You can really see where everybody has them ranked. I think there probably maybe was some confusion too with like, consensus 5-star versus a 5-star, here or there at one of the four outlets that ranks prospects. So, and I think too, when you're typically like, there's a lot of wiggle room with how you label a guy when you're writing a story or, doing a tweet or whatever. You could probably find, Jaden Wayne technically is a 5-star for Rivals. So you could call him a 5-star and not be wrong. Is he a 5-star, in the On3 consensus? No. And that's just because he shakes out at number 36. So
why would one service see him as a 5-star and another service see him as a 4-star? This obviously happens all the time. So
yeah,
like, why would that be the case?
I mean, it's hard to say. Like, I don't know. Like
different criterias.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely different strokes. I think, I think the philosophies are probably a little different. They definitely vary for all four. Some are probably more similar than others, but it's really hard to say. But like, for example, I could probably guess, but I don't want to say something I'm not informed about on that.
But before there was On3, you worked at 24/7, so you're familiar, with the process there as well. Why would he be, say, number 36 at 24/7 and number 93 at On3? Like, what, where do you, just so people understand, why would there be that kind of disparity?
I mean, I think, I think it would probably just depend on their individual opinions of him, exposure to him, maybe, like more like local exposure to him. I think it just comes down to the opinions of the people that are involved, in the rankings process. Everybody, even though like, I think we try to go as deep and cast as wide a net as possible. And so I think, but with that said, I think exposure can vary, and that could be a positive or negative. You could see a prospect and really like them and move them up. You could see them at an event and, think they're too high and move them down. So I think that like there is a good bit of variance. Like I think this is not exclusive to Jaden Wayne. Like there's a lot of variance in the football rankings, especially relative to like basketball. Football, like these guys aren't playing AAU altogether. Like I think nowadays we see them at more national events, and I think when you see prospects at national events, the rankings are probably going to be closer. Whether it's between On3, 24/7 Rivals, ESPN. I think they probably do get closer and closer as you go. But the fact that there's so many more prospects in football than basketball, and you're dealing with a bunch of different positions, I think there's a lot of variance on the rankings, generally speaking. And I mean, we aren't going to be afraid to be different, whether that's good or bad. Like that's, we don't look at where a guy's ranked anywhere else, and that's not going to influence like where we put them. And I don't think it should. I don't think where we put a guy should influence, what Rivals 24/7 or ESPN puts them. So, but I think in like one thing too, we have one kind of cool product we have at On3 is like the 5-star plus, label. And really, I think that kind of shows the fact that there is a lot of variance. Like, so a 5-star plus for us, if you pull up like the On 300 or the On 3 consensus, you can see, like, if you pull up the ranking and you see Arch Manning, there's 5 stars, has his position, national ranking, state ranking, and there's a plus beside his stars. That is, if you can click on that, that's our 5-star plus label, and that is essentially a prospect who is ranked as a 5-star by every outlet. And right now, there's only 3. So that kind of shows you that there is no real, like, hard consensus on who's a 5-star yet. I think by the time we get to each cycle, there's probably, let's see how many we had in 2022. So there was 8. So 8 of 32 were 5-star.
All 4-star. Wow, that's amazing. I never really paid attention to that.
Yeah, so that's I guess to point out, one, it's a cool product we have, but 2, it kind of shows you that there's a lot of difference of opinion.
Does moving to a school like IMG, which allows a player like Jaden Wayne to be seen more, coming from the Seattle-Tacoma area, where if you don't have an analyst up in the Pacific Northwest, he's not really being seen beyond film. There's going to a high-profile program like an IMG, which allows him to be seen more by everybody, not just On3, but all 4 services are going to see the kids at IMG more than most schools. Does that help them, if they are playing well, move up in the rankings?
I think so. I think moving to IMG, I think you can debate on whether it makes somebody, like, it really depends. It really depends. It's a case-to-case basis. I think if you're moving to IMG from a high school that is where you're playing really quality competition, it can be a little bit of a guessing game. But I think with IMG, what I would say is, well, one, you're definitely going to be seen because there's just so many eyeballs on the program generally. I can watch an IMG game and evaluate, 25 blue chip prospects,
right?
Basically. But that doesn't necessarily
watch every IMG game, probably.
I watch a lot of IMG games for sure.
Right. Right.
But I will say too, IMG prospects play a lower number of snaps than everybody else because, one, they're rotating in. It's not as long of a season. So a quarterback at IMG might throw under 150 passes a year. A receiver at IMG might catch 20 balls. Like, their stats are not going to be impressive. One, because they're rolling in as a shorter season. But I think it matters maybe position to position as well. But a guy like Jaden Wayne, I think what I would say is it'll be easier to evaluate him at IMG. Would it, if you play well, could it help you? For sure. I think it just allows for maybe a cleaner evaluation.
Yeah, like the bottom line is, if he's a 5-star, if he's a true 5-star by the end of this season, you're going to know that he's a true 5-star.
Yeah, I would say you at least have a pretty good hunch for sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's all this debate now, obviously, and you got 4 different services and all that. But if a kid is a real 5-star, by the time he finishes the senior season coming up, especially at a high-profile player, all of you guys, whether it's On3, Rivals, 24/7, ESPN, you're going to know he's a 5-star. And, he may or may not become a 5-star plus with all 4 services. But I think that they would be more than one service making him a 5-star.
Yeah. I would say just to sum it up, IMG can be like a little bit of a sink or swim proposition, just given how talented the roster is. Like, that's the thing, like with Riley Williams, as well. I think, seeing him come over, like, he's going to be playing a lot better competition there. Is he going to get a ton of targets? Typically not. I mean, I would not expect him to put up the same stats he's putting up in Portland, as he's going to put up at IMG. But, like, they're going to play top teams, and you're going to be able to see what he can do. Like, I'm sure he's going to be going up against a lot better defensive backs, than he faced in Oregon. So, I think it's important to look at the context of, I would be shocked if people put up better stats at IMG than they put up at their own high school. But it's more like, are what they're showing translate, to a increased level of competition. And, we carry that into the All-Star games too. Like that's always very helpful. Like for instance, like we'll see Riley at Future 50, this weekend, and that'll probably be a big evaluation point for him. He's a guy that I think it's important to talk about the positives. So he's a guy that we've liked from the jump. I think we were the highest on him initially, and continue to like him. I think we have him ranked as the number 2 tight end right now. I don't think, Deuce Robinson is a great prospect. I saw Deuce Robinson catch, over 100 balls at the Elite 11 a couple weeks ago. But I mean, I don't think it's a deal where, you can say Riley cannot for sure. It couldn't push him as a top tight end in the country. Like we're just kind of enter it with an open mind and see, how he looks. And, but he's one we've always thought really highly of. And I'm looking forward to seeing him out there against some, there's going to be a ton of top DBs at that event. So, we'll see kind of how that shakes out. But yeah, I mean, all these evaluation opportunities are really, key for us. And there's something like, we're always going to enter every, setting kind of with an open mind and be willing to make moves off of that for sure.
All right, he's Charles Power. He's On3's director of scouting and rankings. And Charles, I wouldn't want your job. It's not, you're gonna be praised or criticized.
Yeah, I mean, hey, it's
a million times in a cycle.
Yeah, I mean, it can be a little thankless. Sometimes you feel like you're like a referee. It's like when you make the right call, it's like, oh, like duh. I mean, I knew that. And when you make the bad call, everybody gets on you. But I mean, I don't know. Like I enjoy doing it so much. Like it's like my dream job. So like I enjoy the process of putting it together to where even though if like you might not be getting like the pat on the back from the fans doing it, I mean that's still like I like doing it so much. It's I can put up with it, and I understand too. Like I understand like like fans are really what makes this go. So like
of course, yeah.
Like so and I understand like fans are looking at it from their point of view of their players, and they aren't maybe having to approach this with the big picture that we like put it all together, so and that's one thing too. I think as we continue to go and people like become like familiar with me, like you understand, like, I'm not a fan of anybody. Like the guys who work with me on this are not fans of anybody. Like we want to make it right. Like, this is really about ranking. Like it's very granular. It's about ranking the players and not the teams. And that's the piece for the team rankings. But we are not ranking the teams. We're ranking the individual prospects. And I think when you look at it in aggregate, you will see that players from each team move up and move down every ranking. Like that's almost always how it is. You can kind of like try to compare this and that, but generally speaking, if you want to find something that you aren't going to like, you're not going to have to look hard to find it. But if you want to you can like, it's going to be there too. So I think that's just important context for it. It is what it is, but we just try to approach it and try to be as honest and fair as possible and have a reason for doing everything we do.
All right, Charles. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today. And I hope people got a little something out of this and kind of understand the depth of the process and how difficult it is when you're talking about thousands of high school players every year to weed through it. They have different levels of competition. They're coming from different areas of the country where the brand of football, the brand of coaching, there's great disparities all across the country. So it's not an easy process. It's good that you guys have 10 updates a year, I think, because it allows you to make adjustments on the fly. And I know one fan base that's, going to be watching very closely and is very interested in what you're doing because Miami's recruiting at a very high level this year. Yep. And they're thinking top 3 in South Florida. So we'll see how it shakes out. All right, Charles, thank you so much. We'll talk to you again sometime.
Sounds good.
All right, that concludes our Good Morning CaneSport show for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the insight from Charles Power. And I thank you, as always, for starting your mornings out with us and making the show the success that it is. So for Vacationing Matt Shodell, I'm Gary Ferman. Everybody have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week, everybody.